the CEO and co-founder of DisruptCRE. We are about all things commercial real estate tech, innovation, and I am very pleased to be joined this morning by Michael Davidson. Michael, hello, good morning. Please introduce yourself for our audience.
Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon if you're in Europe, but it's an honor to be here.
Michael, so introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about what you do normally outside of, COVID times. What do you do?
Well, for career, I work for JP Chase, and I've been with JP for 10 years. Before that with Bank of America, before that with Morgan Stanley, so 25 years in corporate real estate. And for JP I manage the global corporate regions. So all of our global locations, office towers, buildings, campuses, I have a large team of very talented people across the globe who handle Asia, EMEA, Latin America, and of course the United States.
How has your job changed in the last couple of months, and what are you focused on right now?
It's gotten a lot busier.
A lot busier?
We're very, very busy. For the past 7 weeks, most of us have been at home, and it's been amazing, Ariel, to have that experience, because despite everyone being distant and not in the office per se, it's fascinating how productive we've been, and even how connected we've been. In some cases, I'd say we're better connected than when we were before the crisis, and we were all showing up in physical locations and traveling. And so we are busier than ever. As you might learn, and I'm sure a lot of our colleagues in real estate have experienced this, when there is a crisis of any kind, whether it's a natural disaster, terrorism, or something like this, real estate suddenly gets put to the top of the agenda in any company. It's about the workplace, it's about the people. Where are we? Are we safe? And this has been no exception. Although this is unprecedented what we are experiencing today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of people in the commercial real estate industry are feeling that way. We're busy, we're tackling problems head on. And a big part of why, we're doing this show is to talk about some of the wins and the positive outcomes, because they're out there. And I think, people like you who are leading the charge, and it's incredible that, with great leadership actually really can come great creativity, innovation, and positive change out of this really interesting and challenging time. And so I want to talk a little bit about your strategy for back to work and getting back to your physical offices a little bit later into our conversation. And I'll let everyone know who's watching, we will be taking questions. Michael has generously offered and opened himself to really help us talk about some of the strategies and give us insights into how he's going to be approaching back to work. And so before we get into that, Michael is a man of many interests, hobbies, and talents. And one of the things that I know you really connect with is history, travel, anthropology, and humanity from a lot of different capacities. And so I know you've made really interesting connections, throughout your career, from drawing from history into how things are playing out in the real estate industry today. And so I want to hear from you. What do you think some of those major connections that we can kind of look back through history and draw from?
Well, it's a good, big question, Marielle. I think that in real estate, when people hear real estate, they often think of the bricks, the mortar, the spaces, the materials, the environments we create. But the root of real estate is people. It's how people use the structures we build, and has always been that case. It's always been in response to a human need of some variety. And so I think, it's just my personal view, that to be good at it and thoughtful about it, you need to understand the human beings that you're planning and building for. And so looking back historically, you realize that there are lessons, many, many lessons to be learned. And I think what's the old saying, if you study history, it's easier to learn from it and avoid mistakes of the past. But I also think that amidst, humanity and how we occupy space and how we build has changed remarkably, obviously for centuries. But there are certain aspects of human nature that have not changed really that much.
Sure.
And the article talks about our connection to each other and our need for each other and our need not to just be connected via technology, but to be physically connected to each other. It's one of our primary operating systems. Touch is an operating system for humanity, and it's how we feel safe, it's how we feel loved, it's how we feel understood and connected with one another. And so I think that while we're learning many lessons over the past couple of months, one of them is a reminder of how important we are to each other and the stress that it causes when we can't have that.
Right.
Even though we can see each other and we can join each other via Zoom and Cisco Jabber and all these other apps, I think that we learn a lot from it.
Definitely.
Forward, I think that it's a reminder to all of us as we are practitioners in real estate and technology going forward. There are certain things that are sacrosanct that we always should keep in mind as we're planning and building the workplace of the future.
And that's just the basic principles of being human and understanding the way that we need to connect for any variety of functions that we're looking to accomplish.
Correct. And that's from a historical perspective. But if you think of traveling, growing up, my family didn't travel. We didn't have the money to travel. And so what we are afforded in this day and age in terms of the ability to experience other cultures, to travel around the world, the volume that occurs is markedly different from anything I'm used to when I was growing up. But what that's also allowed us to do is we know far more about each other, and we learn about the differences and nuances that make cultures different in how they think and how they feel and how they interact. And all of that goes into the workplace. It all goes into these workplace experiences that we curate in so many parts of the world. And no matter how hard we try to standardize it, there have always got to be certain nuances and differences that honor the local customs, culture, and people.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And you must see kind of that side by side comparison from a cultural standpoint as you're strategizing, on your workplace based on location. That's very, very interesting.
Yes.
We did a great talk. And so for those of you who are watching, I linked in the comments already, but I'll add more links after this conversation as we're referencing different materials, resources. Michael wrote a great article called Germs, Humanity in the Workplace. So I showed it on screen right now. I'm going to show you guys some photos that he included in there, but it's a really, really interesting read and kind of dives a little bit deeper into details about exactly what we're referencing right now. Michael also did a fantastic talk with DisruptCRE at the end of last year, which let's see if I can play a little bit on YouTube, but it explores the same principle, just matching humans with history. And he talks a lot about how technology has evolved through history to suit human needs and the functions that we're looking to accomplish. And I would love to hear what you think about kind of this rate of adoption of technology. We're touching on it a little bit, but throughout history, it's been slow incremental changes, and all of a sudden we have this massive flood of technology, definitely in commercial real estate, entering into the space, and the rate of adoption has picked up, and it will continue to increase and increase and increase. But how do you think kind of today's environment is going to affect that rate of adoption? Are people going to hold on to these tools and this savviness with technology? Is it going to revert back? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think one of the backbones for why we've been able to do what we can do over the past couple of months, not just from a personal perspective, but just doing business, is a testament to how savvy people have become and adaptable with the aid of technology. Look, if this pandemic happened 20 years ago, I don't know what it would be like. I think that our connections would be much quieter. I don't think that the meetings and what we're able to share with each other and at least feel a temporary connection would be the same. I think it's a blessing. But, it's like anything, everything in moderation. What we found in society is that technology is a tool. And just like you don't use a hammer for every single thing in carpentry, you have a toolbox of many things that you use to build. The same for us. if you lean on technology too much, if you rely on it too much, what happens is that you start to feel a different kind of distance, like a cyber distance or a cyber loneliness. And we see that in our children, we see that in kids in school, we see it with adults and rates of depression, et cetera.
Yeah.
And so I think moderation is very important to remember, that while it's accessible and, we get updates on our phones and often it's unsolicited, information and data comes at us without us asking for it, and we are prompted to respond. Sometimes you have to turn it off. You have to turn it off and turn on the age-old conversation with another person, connecting with your friends, spending time outside. You need to have those as part of your diet, so to speak,
Right.
emotionally, as you live your life.
Yeah, or even just connecting with yourself, a reprieve from just looking at screens and talking over the phone or on Zoom. I find that a lot of people that normally I would speak on the phone with, all of a sudden it's a Zoom call, where before it wasn't a Zoom call. It was just a normal phone call. So it's interesting to see some of these progressions. I think cyber fatigue is something that you and I spoke about, I don't know, last fall, before any of this was even in our world. And it's a real thing. And it's, I think, something that is starting to really penetrate the workplace. People are starting to consider, how do we design a space to encourage and enhance those physical in-person human connections throughout the day?
Yes.
What do you think? Talk to me a little bit more about kind of this notion of cyber fatigue and how it's translating into your world and kind of the general real estate world.
Well, I think, in everything we're talking about, we'd love to have binary answers, and we love hyperbole, like something's all good or all bad, but we have enough of that. I think that there is a spectrum when it comes to the use of technology. So if we're managing teams across geographies that we can't be together, we're just not physically in the same country or the same region, first there's email, and then there's phone with no video, and then there's video where you can see each other. Each gradation, the more sophisticated the technology, the closer the connection. So if we were doing this very stream right now without any video, it would be a starkly different experience, because we're saying so much with our bodies. I'm saying so much with my eye contact. So are you. So is everyone. So I think that if we're able to connect visually with each other, that's sort of a higher level of engagement that is an advent really over the past, 10 years? However, there is still the need for in-person connection, even running a business. When I travel to see a team in Asia and Hong Kong or London, there is something that happens physically live in the room with other human beings that does not happen no matter how good the video feed is or how good the technology is.
Right.
Magic of humanity.
Yeah, well, you can exchange energy. You can feel what somebody is bringing to the table.
We exchange energy, and I think that the speed to trust, when our senses are able to exchange in person, I think is a big part of it. It's how we process and gain trust and understanding of each other.
So do you notice big either cultural differences or just whatever kind of differences, in some of the other places around the world within your portfolio that maybe have started opening offices, coming back to work? What's it like out there?
So when this started and when it hit EMEA and the States, when this started to sweep into Western civilization, Asia had been dealing with this for a couple of months before this.
Right.
And Asia has dealt with, as in the article, several other micro pandemics within the region over the past 10 years. So that's another conversation altogether, is why the succession of all of these diseases that are related. But so Asia had been doing this for a couple of months, and we are in the process of returning to the office across the region. Some faster than others, whether you're talking about China, Singapore, or India, for instance, sort of a different dynamic. But overall, what we're finding is that the response when it first broke out there, the behavior of the people, that was far more adapted to the challenge. One, I think to be fair, it's political and how countries are governed.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of the control of the government over how people behave is very different. In the States, we love our liberties and our freedom. So like, don't tell me what to do. As long as
Right.
I'm abiding by the law, I'll do what I want. In other
Right.
it's not always the case. And so rule of law and control over people's behavior is a defining factor, especially when you need people to act in a certain way in unison in a big hurry. Some of those countries, China, they have an edge over us culturally. The other thing is that the people who live there have been through this a few times. So wearing masks, isolation, those protocols, those really important safety protocols, it's not as new to them, many
Right.
of them, but it's new to us.
Yeah, it sure is.
New to this culture. So I mean, that which you're not used to is foreign to you and very hard across a population for the United States with 350 million people. Well, how do you roll that out? How do you roll it out with an inherent cultural composite in the United States of freedom and liberty for all, which is why we're finding people actually protesting
Sure.
the very isolation and control that we're trying to implement and sustain to keep us safe.
Yeah. It's very interesting times
Yeah.
in that regard. And I think, there's some other things that I think pose just general concern from a real estate infrastructure standpoint, from a technology standpoint. Facial recognition is something that has long been discussed, biometrics in general in commercial buildings. And I think to some extent there are good reasons. You remove the friction of interacting with a physical building, especially if you're there every day and it can get to know you without having to use a badge or whatever, printed out security sticker. But so facial recognition in particular, where you see, all over Asia is widely adopted, widely used, China, in particular. And then you have states, like, or cities like San Francisco that ban facial recognition technology, and people don't want that because of our liberties. We don't want these really intimate details about us being shared and being, transferred, God knows where. And so I think there is a little bit of concern that we may push past some of those initial hesitations to technology like facial recognition for the sake of the greater good.
Yes.
And so, I mean, what do you think about that? Do you think that's something that's plausible?
I think here's the balancing act. So we all have a right to privacy and we love to protect those rights. However, with all of the efficiencies in this world that technology delivers, there's an awful lot of data about us being gathered, how we spend.
Yeah.
Everything goes online because it's more efficient. So we do it. We pay our bills online.
Right.
Most of our purchases are credit cards, emails, apps. There's so much data about the person being gathered by so many different companies. The question is, the balancing act is this. There's stuff we need to learn from that data, but how do you retain privacy in the midst of that? How do you learn from it and protect people at the same time when there's so many players in that market that hold our data? And that's a question. For JP Morgan Chase, think of the volume of transactions that flows through a major global bank in terms of people's behavior. Auto loans, mortgage loans, credit card payments, where you go, where you eat, where you drink, what movie theaters, if you still go to movie theaters.
Right.
Are you a Netflix subscriber? There's a lot that flows through the pipes of the financial system. So, I mean, even for us as a firm, it's a balancing act. How do we learn about ourselves and our clients without compromising their privacy and dignity, frankly?
So you're going to give us the answer right now, right? What's the secret sauce, Michael? I mean, we've been talking about this for forever, right? It's always that balancing act. And every time you implement a new technology into the physical ecosystem, it's introducing a new vulnerability. I think a lot of people too, like, we're willing to give so much information away without even knowing it. I on Twitter all morning and Facebook and LinkedIn and YouTube and, every other platform, let alone, if I go shop on Amazon or I go look for a home on Zillow and stay at a hotel or buy a flight and go, use an airline. I mean, information about us is being filtered and captured in every possible way. But I think that we're entering into this new era, if you will, where more and more information will be gathered about us in physical spaces, because that's the nature of what we're fighting right now, is not having a density of population in physical spaces. And so how much can we expect building sensors to be alerting owners about how, you know, there's too many people in this conference room or too many people in this publicized amenity space? And what are the actions? What are the protocols as like a building owner or an occupier that you take thereafter? I can imagine that, you know, it might be interesting and a little bit challenging for employees to wrap their heads around that as they're thinking about coming back to work.
It is. I think everything you just said is on people's minds. People are far more tuned into how buildings are operated. People are far more tuned into the many surfaces they touch every day. You think about it. If you think of the surfaces you touch going to and from work, forget the workplace. What about the surfaces you touch, you know, on your way to work?
Oh, yeah.
In New York City, you get on a subway. I mean, they're being disinfected now.
The subway!
And whether you touch the subway pole or not was sort of at your own peril.
Right.
You grab the Purell out of your pocket. So I think that people are far more tuned into all of these very tactile, sensory experiences because they realize that there's danger. Maybe not the same kind of danger as the past, but it's a very real and present. However, I think also that typically people that occupy buildings and work for companies are so used to the companies serving them. Here's what we're going to do for you to keep you safe. Here's what we're going to do for you so that you're more productive. We're going to give you new tools. We're going to give you a new desk. We're going to give you new collaborative technology. It's always that one way. Here's what we're going to do for you. Health programs, 401k matches. In this instance, and it's said in the article, and we are talking deeply about it at JP Morgan, is what do we expect of our people to keep each other safe? You know, I think each person has a mantle of responsibility, a mantle of personal hygiene, of behavior to keep each other safe, honoring distance, wearing masks where they're appropriate. You know, when I go out, you know, for a walk, some people are wearing masks, some people are not.
Right.
Some people are distant, some people are not. You know, it's kind of a mixed bag. And I think that we have to put an onus on our people as well, because at JP Morgan, we have, 250,000 people. Let's just speak in general terms. If each one of those people knew that they were supposed to keep clean desk, if they were supposed to follow certain etiquette and rules in the workplace around all this hygiene, you suddenly have a workforce of 250,000 people that are now attached to your cleaning staff and all the other wonderful people who are working tirelessly to do their jobs. You know, Mariel, in another overgeneralization, you might say, okay, there are 7.8 billion people in the world. If every person each day picked up one piece of litter off the ground, in a year, how many pieces of litter would not be on the ground or in our oceans if every person simply picked up one thing each day? So, you know, if you do things in scale, thoughtfully across the population, I think you can mobilize in response to things like this far better and faster, which has also been the challenge in Western civilization. So, or I should just say even the United States. Every state has a different governor, and I won't go into the media each day, but you can see all the consternation between states versus the federal government. So getting large groups of people in unison is a real challenge.
It's so interesting that you're talking about this, because we traditionally in office experience, occupier experience, office experience, workplace experience, all of that good stuff, we talk a lot about building emotional investment of employees and connecting them to a space. And it's this kind of abstract thing where you don't really know how to quantify it or qualify it. We're starting to become a little bit clearer with communicating value prop of that through, you know, design and flex offerings and things like that. But it's interesting to emotionally connect people to their workplace through just like that human element of taking care of each other. It is kind of like this really unifying thing that just wasn't there before, or if it was, it wasn't prioritized in such a way. it's really interesting. I think and I think we also see this playing out right now with a lot of like the tenant engagement apps, even though people can't physically be in their buildings. They have, just because we've had this now come up in the last few years where we have tenant engagement apps and occupier experience is becoming such a, hot topic. But tangibly, those buildings, those occupiers are able to communicate in a streamlined, really connected way to their employees, and still offer them learning opportunities, digital events,
Yes.
different kind of foundational elements that connect each other as humans.
And all of that connectivity and all those communications between landlords and tenants and the media, it is extremely valuable and useful.
Yeah.
And it's extremely dangerous, because when we were in the weeks going into quarantine, we would get a myriad of phone calls and inquiries. I heard this about this tenant and we have space there too. What's going on? What's the plan? It can fuel a myriad of other conversations around anxiety. Sometimes the more people know, it's not always the best. It's what they know that's important, not the volume of it. And so I think when people are afraid, emotions take over, and the instinct is to ingest as much as you can possibly ingest, but you're taking in everything. You're taking in good information, you're taking in bad information. And
Right.
so, even we have to put a filter on what we ingest that surrounds us and swirls around us. And we encourage the same with our people, certainly across the company. And it's interesting. In real estate, we work so closely with every part of the company, every business, every function, is that we've built the trust that allows them to listen to us in times like this. It's sort of, the old saying is, build your bridges in peacetime, not during war. So if you've irrigated and developed the right relationships with the right people in your company, the right people in your industry, the right people in your personal life, then a crisis hits and you're far more equipped to survive it, because all your bridges and infrastructure, your personal infrastructure, are built. Same with an organization or a company.
So, Michael, do you have people that are at work somewhere in the world right now?
Yes, we've had people at work all the way through this crisis.
Crazy.
Not many, but we've had people. We have critical staff that have to run buildings. We have cleaners and staff that have to respond as cases come up, and we have to clean spaces all over the world overnight in response. So we have heroic, wonderful people all over the world who have put themselves in the line of fire while many of us stay home safely, and we honor them. There's thousands and thousands of them who had to put bread on the table for their families.
Yeah.
And they leave every day, their kids and their husbands and wives at home while they went and worked, while most of the world didn't. So we have had people. And we've had people running the businesses, of course, in various locations around the world. And so now the challenge is, how do we gradually and slowly get back to some semblance of normalcy as a company, region by region? That's what we're going through right now.
And so are there any things that you feel that you would be like, any particular aspect of this back to work strategy that you feel like you want to share, that's something that you maybe didn't expect, or it's playing out in a way that you think is valuable for others to know about?
So let me start at the high level. In real estate, at least the real estate that I have been exposed to for 25 years, the tempo of the conversation is always, can't you go faster? Why is it?
Well, we know that doesn't happen in commercial real estate.
That's what we hear. So we're always, that's part of our, in real estate, the DNA is, can you do it faster? Like, why is it taking so long? And why is that test fit taking so long? And can you build it faster? And so, to be a real estate professional, you have to be almost a psychologist and a marketing professional. But most of all, you have to be a good storyteller to explain to people who don't do what we do, why the things we do, to do them right, require thought and time to execute in a seamless way. Not to mention the myriad of services and functions that we integrate in the real estate. So we're like, a real estate professional is kind of like a CAO in many cases. We do a lot of the integration across companies.
Right.
That's number one. But now it's different. This is a starkly different psychology because now speed is our enemy. Now, the entire mantra for how we return to the office carefully, thoughtfully, organically, so that our people are safe and that we don't have to rush back home because we did it too quickly. The entire conversation is different. I'm on calls now with my team, with people running the markets for JP Morgan, and I'm not advocating speed. I'm advocating, please go slow. Please, let's just do this one step at a time. Let's learn our lessons slowly and carefully so that, the old saying, fools rush in. Return to the office, return to the society, fools rush in. And I think that if we can collectively be patient and do one step at a time, and again, not be binary or hyperbolic, let's all rush back and let's gather, it's over, it's not going to get me, that kind of thing. As a company, we are exercising extreme patience for how we do this. And it won't be one size fits all.
Right.
Different countries in Europe will get different strategies. And part of it, depending on the size of the firm, if it's a global firm, you have all these people and you have all these cultures. And so first you get a communication and a strategy at the very top level that kind of goes across the entire company. For big companies, a message that you can send to your entire population and it applies to everyone is very rare. There's always something different that has to get customized or tweaked for the local regions. So in this case, for return to the office, when we went to quarantine, it was much easier to do a top-down, like methodical exodus. Everyone needs to go home. I'm overgeneralizing that, but everyone needs to go home. And that happened more or less pretty quickly. The return to the office is different in that you can't do it top-down exclusively. It requires now deep local engagement. So you have the company's framework, and how do you make something global regional? How do you make something regional local? And then how do you make something local personal? So if you're a person that's been home for 7 weeks with your kids and your family, and you're thinking, well, oh my goodness, return to the office, like I have got to get to the office and back as well.
Right.
So am I comfortable going back, and the fear, am I picking something up that I'm bringing back to my family? There's a whole lot of psychological dynamics in that. So we are focused first and foremost on our people, on their physical safety, but also their emotional safety. You don't want to bring someone back to the office and have it be a traumatic, horrible experience.
Right.
Also why starting small and being thoughtful and methodical and local and personal is vital, so that we don't make the wrong move and have to pull people back. That's what we're going through now. And Mariel, it is extraordinarily difficult to get a company in an industry, financial services and real estate and everything that we do, to get an entire industry that is programmed to go faster, to go slower. And real estate is
I can't even believe you're saying these things. It's so crazy, right? Because, I focus a lot on the technology side and being creative. And one of the big challenges is that we are really slow as an industry to move forward. But I think one thing that's culturally happened because of this pandemic is in the first few weeks, we wanted to make some sort of moves. It felt very unusual to us as humans to just kind of sit and wait and look around. I know I felt that. We were supposed to host a conference at the end of March, which doesn't just snap your fingers and translate to digital. We could have done that, but what's the purpose? What's the message? All the programming we were going to talk about is no longer relevant, right? So what are we doing? But it feels very unnatural to sit and wait. But I think that you're absolutely right. I think that there's first of all, definitely no one size fits all, especially across so many different places. But so talking about here in the US, I know one of my big concerns, and I'm here in New York City still, is transportation. Even if businesses start opening and, if I had a particular office, how do I get there? I mean, maybe, I know some people are taking Ubers and taxis and things like that, which comes with its own challenges. But will people feel safe to get on the subway or commute into the city from Long Island or Westchester or wherever they're coming from? And are those the people that are essentially, essential and need to be in the office, or can they be still working from home? And when does that, stop? So, and I think we have an interesting question kind of that speaks to this for folks, who a lot of which will move out of the city during this time and into the future because they want space and they don't want to look at the four walls of their apartment and be so isolated, maybe even from family and friends and nature and all of that. So we have one question from Jennifer, which I think is on target for this moment in time, thinking of the future of suburban real estate for those who do not want to commute, which I can imagine is a lot of people who are at home in the suburbs right now, and more satellite offices. Do you think this is the future, and what would that look like? I mean, you can take that in any way that you.
Well, I think, the urban, suburban, rural, how we live, how we work, how we play is an ongoing, evolving debate. I think that this experience is going to certainly make firms rethink how they approach resiliency, physical recovery of their people and of businesses. And I think that companies will be far more sensitive to the demographics for where their people live and how they actually get to work, and how practical is that. Not just during something like this, but in natural disasters and hurricanes and earthquakes and all the other horrible things that we deal with through the year.
Right.
I think how you recover your workforce in a thoughtful way and where you need critical mass is another question altogether. While our focus on safety and return to the office, that's the lion's share of our focus is our people. But in parallel with that, real estate wise, we're thinking deeply about how much of the new lessons learned and habits are going to stick when everything. Sure. So we have colleagues in Asia that have lived through this before, and they've talked about the arc of the response, so that in the heat of the pandemic, in the heat of the crisis, there are a lot of ideas. Let's change this. Let's change how we approach that. A lot of physical changes to the environment itself, which is a direct reaction to the crisis that's confronting you. That's a natural reaction. But then a year or two after the crisis, how much of that sticks?
Remains, right?
How much of those immediate responses actually become the workplace of the future, or do they become a temporal response to a moment in time? And that's something we have to be careful about. We have 75 million square feet all over the world. If we went and tried to do tweaks to our physical workplace design on scale in response to this, first of all, it would take a very long time. Hopefully be over by the time we finished. But then, how much of what you're doing is an emotional near-term response, which in a way feels good because you're doing something. Right. If you want to feel good, rearrange your furniture. If you want to feel good, change something, because it manifests and it's evidence to say, see, I did something, we did something. Don't we feel good about it? Whether that's durable over time is another question. So we are being very careful around our physical workplace that we've worked hard to build and design, to think deeply about how do we respond to certain things that need to be responded to right now, like discrete functions in the bank that are special, that operate differently, and what kind of protection do they need? How do we alter their workplace? But not on a grand scale. It's more or less focused on protecting the person, less on let's rethink our floor plans full scale, which we may have to do.
Yeah, I mean, this is a very interesting.
To some extent eventually, and that's fine, but we want to do that methodically as the dust settles and we see where humanity comes back to humans again, where humanity settles after this. The more provocative question beyond the workplace design itself is, how much space do you need?
That was my next one.
Talk about the economic landscape. Let's talk about firms, small businesses. Love them, God love them. People are suffering, and that is not going to go away very quickly. So the economic financial crisis, that will continue. And so firms are going to look for any opportunity to lower expenses, optimize themselves even more. So So in real estate, listen, on a good day pre-crisis, what were our occupancy levels across the industry? I've read a million papers on this. I don't know, 65, 70%, 75%, depending if you're in a call center, higher.
Or lunch,
but
maybe.
I mean, where are people? They're traveling, they're at the office, on vacation. But
Yeah.
go conservatively. If you say that 20% of your portfolio is more or less vacant at any point in time. Yep. Not to mention it's vacant on nights and weekends. So if you add
Right.
up the amount of time that space in our portfolios that we pay for and build and invest in is vacant, that much. So this is now going to beg the question. Okay, if that was the reality before this, and let's say that after this, if 10% of this group or 20% of that group think that they can work remotely going forward, well, that only depresses the demand for physical space even further. And then it starts to unlock, real estate strategy. Maybe we can do consolidations or exits. Maybe we can be smarter because the demand for space is not going to go away. We're still a company. People still have to come back together. They want to come back together.
Right.
But how do we nip and tuck our real estate strategies to not only deliver expenses, but also to just right size the portfolios based on how people will be behaving going forward? I think that's something in parallel that we are thinking about, but a clear secondary to the safety of our people today.
I mean, this is a very interesting thing that you brought up, just because traditionally in corporate real estate, there's such a surplus of space that's usually occupied for potential future growth. And that's been the nature, right, of this business for forever. And so even in the last few years, through technology, through tools that help us analyze space, occupier behavior, knowing how much of your portfolio is actually being used. And we know that that number drops a lot of times, even just after lunch, let alone, on a day-to-day basis throughout the day, fluctuates. So a lot of people have asked on this stream over the last few weeks, do we think that people will take more space per person? And it's kind of been this trend into the opposite way, right? We've seen WeWork densify, square foot per person, and a lot of these kind of consolidation trends, especially as co-working and collaborative spaces come online. Do you want to touch on that before we move on to a couple of these interesting questions that we're getting?
Let me be brief. So, and I touched on this in the article as well. Going to the open plan workspace, from the old offices and demised in the perimeter offices and so forth. The move to the open plan workspace needs to be and should be calibrated on a couple of things. I think that the perception for people when you take something away on one hand, if they perceive you're taking something away, you're taking away my personal space. Shared seating, you're taking away how I can personalize my space. Companies need to think, and this is actually very empathetic. If you put yourself in the shoes of your people that you're doing the space and planning for, what is the experience you're delivering them? So we're finding if you go to an open plan environment, but you've not provided collaboration areas, places for people to go have a cup of coffee and sit in a nice environment and meet other people and have conversations. If you ignore the other aspects of what they need in the workplace, and I mean workplace, not just the desk and the office floor, I mean the whole picture. I think that's when it backfires, because they'll say, you took something away from me and you didn't give me something back. I think there's a balance in that you have to be cognizant of giving back to your people in some way. So in our regard, whether it be cafes, whether it be well-appointed cafeterias, pantries that are not the old pantries that are horrible, but nice pantries that are open, that you can sit and have a cup of coffee with your colleagues, with the TV on, or news feeds, etc. It makes it more feel like a living space rather than an institution. That you provide mother's rooms and wellness rooms for people that have those needs. Being attentive and curating the entire employee experience is a deeply empathetic exercise. That if you think through what they live in and what they do for work and how they occupy space, and then what they do as a function. that's another thing. It's if you're really empathetic with a business, you have them explain themselves to you. Like I love to sit down with a line of business and I just say, just help me. Tell me what you do? What's important to you? How do your people interact? And I will tell you, they don't always know the answers.
Right.
They don't often think it through themselves. But when you have to do a floor plan and you have to meet with the real estate team and we're about to hire designers based on what you tell us, the measure 10 times and cut once becomes the approach. And so you take that. So that's just business as usual floor planning and real estate strategy, sort of like the bones of it. But even in this crisis, return to the office, again, is empathetic. What am I asking of the people that work for me that have been home? What am I really asking of them? How do they get to work? Am I asking them to get on New York City buses and subways? Am I asking them to drive to work? And if they drive to work, do they park in a garage? And does the garage have an attendant that touches your steering wheel, that gets into your car and puts, so you start to think through the mechanics. And if you have a large scale company, that's hard to do unless you take that global and make it local and personal, which is where you can engage in meaningful conversations that are catered to a workforce in a given location that makes sense for them.
I want to take a couple of these questions because they're super interesting. Now, I don't know how much you work on kind of the retail side of things and the actual like public interface. I don't think that's your core focus, but we do have an interesting question here just about the nature of people using retail, banks. When you think about your customers, there's obviously going to be even more of a shift to digital/online engagement. What do you think will happen to your retail spaces over the next 12 months? And, I think there's this natural unknown, but would love to hear you shed light if you're open.
Yeah. So I don't personally within Chase manage the retail. A colleague of mine, John McGinley, who is super talented, he and I are peers, and we both work for David Arena, who most people probably on this call know. So in the retail landscape, and not to speak as an authority on it, but only what I have seen and experienced myself over the past couple of months, obviously that's a high touch environment. It's a high touch environment that deserves very special consideration in each market. A lot of these branches are anchors in the community. So while on the one hand, look, you have ATMs if people need cash. You have to touch stuff. You have to show up at a branch to stand on line. There's all sorts of cleaning protocols and disinfecting. But the other thing, even for people that can do their online banking, which is many of us don't have to go to a branch. And we've seen that too. So our online volumes have gone up. However, people still get issued checks. In fact, a lot of people in society still get paper checks once a month. Social Security, things like that. There's a highly manual part of our society that still goes to the bank to cash their checks and deposit. And those people need it more than ever because maybe at home they don't have wireless. Maybe they don't have the online tools. It's very interesting because in speaking to some of our technology colleagues, they said, Michael, work from home, it's great. But they said, you would not believe, Michael, how many people don't have strong wireless or at all where they live, in their apartment, in their homes. We assume we have it, and you and I are, but we assume everyone's like this. No, there are a lot of people who aren't. So in terms of the branch and retail, it's honoring a pretty large part of our society that still need those branches open. Right. And I also think, it's like any bank. There's a symbolic value to it. The bank's open. We're open. And I think that's part of the thrust for getting back to small businesses and getting things open and getting parks open. It's symbolically to say to people that things are getting better and things are coming back to normal, which is a big emotional thing for all of us. And branches and retail and banking is important because if the bank closes and I have my check, how do I get my money?
Right. So I'm sure a lot of people are thinking about that now.
Becomes very real, very. fortunately, we have many branches across the country. So we're able to look at volumes and look at communities that need that more than others and to steer that accordingly.
We have one more question before we wrap up this segment, but I have so many questions. I mean, we could chat for for the whole day if you let us. But I am really interested to hear if there are any kind of technologies that you're using, either to, you know, one of these questions is, have you considered recreating your built environment into a virtual world, which I can imagine could help you iterate on a particular idea, see it, how it manifests, see how it might work, even though you conceptualized it. But aside from like the actual strategy part of back to work, which is a huge part, probably the part that we're in right now, are there any technologies that you think to yourself, yeah, we maybe weren't going to implement that before, but we definitely need that now?
So we have laboratories, more or less technology laboratories and teams around the world that are constantly innovating and incubating all sorts of technologies and ideas. And you think about it, of all the things that we innovate and incubate, maybe a small percentage find themselves showing up in an office or a branch, or it's a technology that we take from the outside. So the answer is yes. Do I have specific examples here and now?
Okay.
No, to be fair, because our focus has been so much on people, tangible, and safety, that I'm sure that there will be things that have been tested during this crisis that will prove out to be durable, long-term parts of our new environment as we go forward. But also, you know, during a crisis, it's not always the best time to launch something new. So we're also careful about that in terms of how much change and how much challenge can people take at one point in time. But that
Right.
means we are constantly incubating stuff internally, and I think that this crisis will shed light on things that work and things that under stress do not work. So like people, technologies like that, we're learning a lot about which systems break at certain points in time and which systems have the bandwidth to on large scale function the way we expect them to.
Are you guys using any sort of like virtual test environments for, you know, identifying strategy or iterating on strategy? It's interesting. I actually haven't heard too much about that. I don't know if it's something I'm sure it is happening.
We have, what this all kind of cuts to is data. Notoriously, even in real estate, when you combine headcount and behavior and services and occupancy and all that stuff, the magic in all of it is we possess the data, but very few are good at mining it. So all of the technologies that we're focused on in real estate is simply mining, organizing, and mining the many data points that come to us, whether it be occupancy, card swipes, logins, cell phone signals, the algorithm of all those different things. Because the age-old question that fuels our industry, and it fuels us at JP Morgan Chase, the most complicated conversations all come down to one question. Like, what do these humans need? And
Right.
where are they going? And what does this team need? What does this business need? And how are they changing? Those are the hardest questions to solve, and takes up a majority of our time, because it's to do proper strategy, planning, designing, and building and renovating for all of these, everyone on this call who do different parts and roles in this industry. That's hard. Building is hard. Mastering materials into shape and form and function is really hard. But even harder than that is shaping human behavior and predicting it.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
spend an awful lot of time on the latter, shaping human behavior, understanding it better, because if you're informed on that, then all of your designing and strategy and building gets even better, because it functions the way it's supposed to.
In our last few minutes, I will take an opportunity to ask you about stuff that you're excited for the future. I want this to be really like positive time for our audience, and there are a lot of interesting kind of creative ways that people will, tackle kind of this next phase of life. So maybe you can talk about something that even, before all of this started, happening, either technology or something that you were excited to see either be built or mature in the market that you were excited for, and maybe it's still applicable today, or maybe not, maybe not.
No, it's a great ending question for this session. I am excited about the following. I think that one of the silver linings for when people are under deep, broad stress for prolonged periods of time, even if you look historically at humanity during wars or in the aftermath of horrible, like World War II or World War I or anything else like that, when humanity bounces back from that bad, hard period, enormous creativity occurs because people have had time to think about things and come up with ideas and ideate and create because they're not running so fast from place to place for the past months. So when humanity sits still, they start to innovate again in a different way. So you can talk about financial services, you can talk about design, you can talk about the workplace, you can talk about ballet, opera, painting, museums, the arts in general. You can talk about cuisine and culinary innovations. You pick your slice of humanity. And what I'm excited about is to see the coiled spring leaping into action once we all feel safe and connected once again. Because I think there'll be things that come out of it that wouldn't have happened if we were just BAU running around as usual. And the beauty in all of that is that it's kind of a surprise because no one knows what's going to come out of this. And I don't think it's just bad stuff. I think that humanity globally will come up with things that are special and make us better, frankly, from every vantage of our lives.
I love that. I actually have a couple here, photos that we didn't share during the stream, but just of your travels and some fun.
Yeah, look, those little girls. That was during a marathon. I don't know where I was, maybe mile 12 or something. But I'm running through these Bhutanese villages, and there's no one around, and these little girls are sitting on the front stoop, and they were just like they loved laughing at me. And so that was actually my advertisement for Apple. That was an iPhone photo because I carried my iPhone through the race. But they were in photographs. Sometimes you're lucky enough to capture the soul of a person. And so I think I caught something in these little girls at a great moment.
Aw, that's awesome. I would say like we're wrapping up. So if there's anything else that you want to share with the audience, yes. It doesn't mean this is the last, time to chat with Michael, and, feel free to keep sending us messages and posting comments. But is there any lasting impressions you want to leave?
I know. Yes, there is one very important lasting impression. Amidst all the death and darkness and the horrible circumstances that we read about and are confronted with, we mourn it's horrible, even in my own network of friends and community. But I would say this: when I was a little kid, when I would complain about stuff, I was very close to my grandparents, and when I would complain, my grandfather would say to me, "Michael, count your blessings. Stop complaining. You have so much." And frankly, Mariel, I never did it. I never actually counted my blessings. I would sit respectfully and listen, and I'd go do whatever I'm going to do, go out and play, ride my bike. However, as the years go on and in times like this, I think about that every day. And mark my words, if you were to sit down and count your blessings, it would take you a really long time. But we don't often count them. We often obsess about what's wrong, which is important, and you have to because you want to stay out of danger and all that stuff. But, if you want an exercise that's worthwhile, write your blessings down, count them, and see how high it goes. I think we have many from many different vantage points. And I think that in the midst of all of this, optimism, hope are really important anchors for all of us. and it's a time to celebrate the things that we have and possess. Even in the world landscape, we have so much more than so many people, which is also what traveling does for you. And, I've seen and heard so many stories like, I was in this third world country and they have nothing, but they're so happy. Why are they so happy? Why are they laughing? Because they have many blessings, and the things that they focus on are the blessings that are around them. They don't focus on what they have not, they focus on what they have. And it might be their friends or their family, or just, they live in a beautiful place, very simply.
Right.
So I think, happiness is a choice. Unhappiness is a choice. And I think that we should all count our blessings.
Thank you so much, Michael.
Yeah.
It's always such a pleasure chatting with you, and I appreciate everything you shared. I know our audience definitely does. And again, we'll be sharing some of the links and resources and article that Michael wrote recently in the comments. So make sure to send, any questions and comments his way. And I think he'll be pretty active, getting back to people if you guys have more to chat with him about. But thank you, and we will talk to you soon, Michael.
Ariel, thank you. Thanks, everyone.
All right, here comes Jamie Russo. Here she is. Jamie, good morning. It's really morning for you. You're out on the West Coast.
It is morning for me. I know, totally.
Actually, I should say it's just afternoon now for us here on the East Coast. But how are you? Introduce yourself for the audience, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, that was a really nice conversation with Michael. I didn't get to hear all of it, but he is lovely. I was like, I feel so, I don't know, inspired and grateful. He's right. I'm going to do we actually have a grateful book. Literally, it says grateful on it, sitting on our dining room table. And we've gotten out of the habit of writing our, what are we thankful for every day? But
that's awesome.
I think I'm re-inspired to get back to it.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I think that's all any of us can do, right? We wake up healthy, and you have to just be grateful for even that alone, and like what our bodies can do for us.
Yeah.
And hopefully, Michael is definitely inspiring, but for a lot of us, we have the luxury of being creative and try to reimagine what this new world will be and what we can bring to it. And so if you don't mind, introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of usually what you do, maybe a little bit how it's changing, and we can jump in.
Yeah. So thanks for having me. I wear a few different hats. So sometimes too many. I have been a co-working space owner for 8 years now. So I used to live in Chicago. So I started a space in Chicago in 2012 and then moved to the Bay Area in 2013. And I've had a co-working space in Palo Alto for 7 years. I became really passionate about the industry early on, and just kind of the shift around the consumer choice about where they work, and just kind of what the industry was bringing to the table as options for those who could choose. So I took some leadership roles fairly early on. I started a podcast. I have a podcast called EverythingCoworking. Kind of cover, industry news and happenings and education. I love to help people.
Which is linked in our comments for anybody who wants to check it out.
Totally. Yeah. I'll throw it in the comments. So you know what? I can't for some reason.
Oh, no, it's already in there, Jamie. I got
you. Put it in there. You do have to work. Perfect. I'll keep going. So podcast, kind of leadership positions, and then at some point the Global Workspace Association. So the flexible office industry, sort of in its original form, has been around since the 70s.
Yeah.
So, places like the original version of Regis, they've kind of evolved their model over the years, and they still have their original brand, but they have spaces and some other incarnations of flexible shared office space, but literally since the 70s. And of course, it was mostly kind of attorneys and professional services folks for a long time. And then when things started to shift, like 2006 to 2010, like the industry kind of started to evolve. So there was an industry association, and it's been through a number of different names. And in 2016, they said, we really need to make a shift and reflect the current environment. So they asked me to be the executive director, kind of help us get into the current state of the world. And, it's been quite a ride for the past few years. I don't think any of us expected things to happen quite so quickly. We give a lot of credit to, WeWork for that. Like,
Yeah.
been some ups and downs with WeWork, but for really accelerating, kind of what that model looks like and the adoption and just general awareness. So
Right.
I think that's really part of it. Like the model's been around forever, but people just kind of didn't think of it as an option. And the way, it had kind of a specific design, lots and lots of, private spaces, which we may sort of,
Right. Really big handed.
Yeah. So I run, so it's called the Global Workspace Association, and our core member is folks who run flexible office space. So either landlords that are doing shorter term, more flexible plug and play space, to operators like a WeWork, like an Industrious, who are doing, more highly full serviced, shared office space, still on,
Right.
pretty friendly terms for the consumer. And then in my Everything Coworking hat, I teach people how to open co-working spaces. So I have a program called the Co-working Startup School. And then I also have a certification program for the community managers who run co-working spaces. So kind of an education platform for the industry.
Very nice.
Yeah.
I think that on a lot of people's minds are what's going to happen with co-working spaces.
Right.
And it's not just co-working, right? We use the word co-working as this overarching kind of classification of a lot of different flavors of space as a service. And space as a service, it's a lot of those highly amenitized spaces that we're talking about. It's not just, hey, this is a hot desk and I'm here to work, or a private office like in a Regis or even WeWork. It's really this ecosystem of services that you get in choosing to work in a particular place to suit your lifestyle. And there are, especially I know here in New York, I'm sure there in San Francisco too, there are endless flavors of co-working and flex space, service space, depending on who you are, what your interests are, what your job is, etc. So is this something that we can expect, do you think, to stick around? Is it something that's going to benefit from everybody having to be so closed off and working from home and not really knowing how to reenter, the workplace? Is it going to be a kind of a stepping stone, or, what's up with flexible space?
Yeah. Well, so I'll tell you, I'll try to bring in other points of view, because, I always tell everyone, like, look, I drink the co-working Kool-Aid for breakfast every morning. Obviously all of my hats I'm like deep in.
Yeah.
I love the industry. I love the people in the industry. The people in the industry tend to be very passionate about what they're doing, because we do what we're doing to make people's lives better, right? We want to work. Everybody who owns a co-working space has this vision for the environment they want to create, the community they want to create, and this ability for people to come to a place that makes them feel like their best selves. Like, not to over cheese it, but oftentimes why people get into it, or they just, they come from a real estate background and see, the inefficiencies that happen, probably inefficiencies and just the gap between what the consumer would like to buy and what the landlord and the banks would like to sell. So a couple things. So I would just lay some landscape, as you did, around sort of the flavors of what's out there. One of the things I would point out is that most people are familiar with, WeWork in particular. Regis is IWG is a public company. Servcore is a public company. So there are a couple of public large players in this space, but 85% of the market is made up of independent operators. So, it's kind of like the coffee shop model or the hotel model, where there's some major flags and then lots of, folks who want this to be their, lifestyle business.
Right.
And then there's a big range between like folks who are doing one location in a small town to more regional players. There are players with 20 spaces, 30 spaces, whereas WeWork and, Regis and Servcore have hundreds, but most of the market is really fragmented and serving, local markets. So I think that's an important context to set in terms of the more highly serviced co-working spaces. And then I think, sort of the more flexible office options, you could put like a no-tell in there, or all the, EQ, Tishman, like all, lots of the institutional Hines landlords are getting into, how do we make our portfolios more flexible? And to your point, like, what does the ecosystem look like? Like in my portfolio, I may have a highly serviced co-working space I may, be offering, 2,000 to 5,000 square feet at a, 2 to 3 year term. And those folks have access to the highly, serviced co-working space that has extra meeting rooms and, amenities in the space. The community piece has become, such a bigger deal. And I've seen a lot about, sort of talked about the benefits of that piece today with what's going on, like in Equium, where the tenants have, sort of no idea what's going on, but there's this communication platform that was sort of put into place, to start sort of bringing people together and highlighting, amenities in the building and maybe doing some, kind of social events. And now it's becoming an important communication tool, for safety and updates, and we'll continue to do that, which I think is a big deal. So to your question about sort of, what's up and what are we gonna see happen? I think there's gonna be a big range. So overall, on the demand side, we think, and again, co-working Kool-Aid, but a lot of the indicators are coming from enterprise users who are already in that, and I didn't get to hear all of Michael's discussion, but clearly they're already like, how are we going to re-enter? What is this going to look like? What are the things going to look like? And a lot of corporate real estate folks know that like the answer is not going to be to run back to the corporate campus or headquarters, for many reasons. Dogs. Sorry, I'll talk over for the dogs. It's not loud. The joys of being at home. I mean,
I know we've had quite a few pets. Sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, like, for the individual, while there's a health and safety concern, there's also like, who can't wait to get back to their, normal office without dogs and kids,
or at least just an office or any dedicated space away from where you do all of your other functions in life, right?
Exactly.
Some sort of dedicated workspace.
Yeah. So back to sort of the corporate user who has been slowly adopting flex space, and part of that is because, sorry, I'm echoing a little bit. Can you hear that? No. Okay, good. If you can't hear it, I won't let it bother me. So the corporate user has been kind of slowly adopting flex space. Part of that is because they already have space that they're paying for, right? So some are moving more quickly as they're divesting of assets and need a place to put remote teams, like Verizon's one, Accenture. There are some big companies that have gone pretty hard at kind of having less corporate assets, but others are kind of moving.
Diversifying.
Yeah. So, but I think that will start to accelerate, and there may be some inefficiencies at the front end of this because, employees are going to say, we're not ready to go back to this large campus that's largely like harder to control because there's so much space. And by the way, I'm now not commuting an hour and a half each way every day. And I feel entitled to say, I figured this out. I don't want to. I want, more balance in my life. I want to be able to get work done in other places. And you haven't sort of let me, but now look, we've done this massive work from home experiment. And, in many ways, it's much better than probably people thought it would be. There are many things that still need to be done in person. So, I'm a big advocate of that. So what we're seeing the, sort of corporate folks think about is like, okay, well, what are the solutions? How do I give people, some people will say, I'm at home, I'm good at home, I'm staying at home. Yeah. Some people will be like, I'm back to the headquarters as soon as that opens. It's where I want to be. It's where my people are. And then there will be this middle group that, happy at home sometimes, will go to the corporate office if they have to meet with teams, and would like this middle place, which could have many flavors. It could be the local co-working space. It could be a flex space that, the company takes on that's just for, their team. It's 1,000 square foot project space or 2,000 square feet, for a year or two, where people can go and be together, have, more space, adhere to their own protocols, feel comfortable that they know who's in the room. So I think we're going to see a faster adoption of kind of third spaces and flex use, and it'll kind of range based on, what people feel like they need.
Right.
I think one of the challenges for sort of I think there are opportunities and challenges for, sort of the highly serviced co-working space, which is they tend to be smaller. So the other thing I would point out is, some of us are familiar with WeWork. WeWork will take 50,000 square feet, 100,000 square feet. I mean, they'll take down a lot of space, and that probably feels maybe, not as comfortable, but there are lots of local options that are 10,000 square feet, 20,000, a much more controlled and highly staffed environment. So I think the ability for co-working spaces to sort of be, adapt really quickly and have a high level of control. Like we've heard operators say, A, they're going to take temperatures when members walk in, and then B, it'll be, kind of a touchless environment as much as possible. So the community manager will play the barista. And so, when you come in the morning, you'll tell her what you, or him, what you want for your coffee, they'll bring it over. So the kitchen will be closed, but you can still get some of the amenities because they have this, service staff that can take care of some of those things. So
do you think that we'll see some of those kind of like robotic baristas? And like, I did a chat with, a couple months ago now about hospitality trends. And we saw just even in hotels, robots being used to take food orders and different kind of service orders to, on off times where humans, it's the night shift, it's late, right, into just to keep that level of service beyond human capacity. But I think this is such an opportune time to implement and try some of these things out to help people feel a little bit safer about going about their normal functions.
Yeah, the robotic thing is interesting. I could see that in a lot of sort of flex environments, especially where you're trying to offer service, but it's less of a highly serviced sort of co-working environment. The thing with co-working is they really pride themselves on the human connection.
I mean, that's most cases, right? That's what we all try to accomplish in real estate, I think, is that human and emotional connection, like we were talking about a little bit with Michael.
But to your point, and I know you focus on a lot on technology in real estate. I think co-working spaces have been slower to adopt some of it, and I think that's about to change really quickly. I mean, there is quite a tech stack involved in co-working, but a lot of it's like kind of managing the member experience and billing and, kind of all the sort of logistical aspects of people being in the space. Door access is one, but that's an example. A lot of co-working spaces will use like a KeyC. OpenPath has not, I think we'll see more OpenPath market share in the co-working space. So it's been, sort of open the door with your phone, but you still have to touch the door probably to get it open. So I think we'll see, I watched Michael Beckerman's, one of his series of webinars about kind of technology evolution. And I think co-working spaces, sort of any flex, any office space in general, but also, folks who have just a lot of different people touching things. Guest access being automated, door access, that automatic door openers, so that once you swipe in because you have access to the door, and then the door will then automatically open for you, and then you'll be able to come in. So I think some of those, and then touchless things in like bathrooms and kitchens, like garbage cans, soap dispensers,
or something I think about a lot.
Yeah, right, completely. So I think like just a higher level of technology to support, safety basically will start to be quickly adopted.
Yeah. I mean, I think that it has to. I think, elevators are an interesting one, and some of these other components where it's naturally like we have to not only touch, but also be in these enclosed spaces. And I know even just, WeWork seems like such an interesting model and a natural go-to because they have all of those kind of built out spaces within, it's not just that open floor plan.
Yeah.
And so I can imagine a lot of kind of internal, like interior design, having to change to be much more temporary, which, it is kind of, and like Michael said, like of all times in history for us to be living through this, we have technology, we have a lot of kind of means for communication, collaboration, but also in commercial real estate, it is kind of this unprecedented time where we're sitting here with a lot of tools to help us be malleable and not invest in an office design or a physical building infrastructure that has to last 50 years, but rather can change maybe even month to month.
Yeah.
So I think, it is an interesting time to be sitting here in and having to be creative. Another thing that, and I don't know if you've thought about this at all, you're in San Francisco, I'm sitting here in New York, so it's quite a different environment, but I look out the window and I go for walks and I see endless empty retail stores, and not stores that have closed necessarily because of COVID, but stores that were already empty.
Yeah.
And I've thought to myself quite a few times, just knowing that I want to be doing this live stream show every week, and also just generally would love a place to work that's not my apartment. Those retail stores are sitting empty. And like, I wonder if, some of those will be put to work, or some other real estate assets that traditionally aren't used for work, but are maybe empty or underutilized or deemed no longer applicable or relevant because of kind of this new normal that we're going to eventually re-enter. Do you see spaces potentially being repurposed for?
I think it's really interesting. I mean, the interesting opportunity there is that you can sort of design from scratch for social distancing, and you can do it in sort of a pop-up way, because we all hope that eventually, maybe it's 18 months, maybe it's 2 years, but 2 years is not that long, right? And so, I sign a 10 to 15 year lease, or I own a building, like 2 years is like a blip. And so, to your point, there are a lot of shifts happening around, some of it is more just de-densification, so pulling chairs and.
It was so crazy, Jamie, because we've been going the opposite way for so long.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right. I think with the densification piece too, though, is there are spaces who build their model on densification. And in markets like Manhattan and San Francisco, you simply have to make it, to make the financial model of like a WeWork or another co-working type of space to work, because rents are so high. Right. But in lots of markets, that density is not nearly as strong. And so I think, again, people have this picture of like shoulder to shoulder. That does happen in, we've seen it, you walk into a space, and especially I think in high tech areas, like it's just acceptable. Yeah. But in a lot of markets, it's not nearly as dense. And so there will be sort of less pain around the change. But back to your pop-up idea, there's a guy named Jerome Chang, who's an architect. He owns a brand called Blank Spaces in the LA area. And he's talked about that for a while. I don't hear many people talk about it in the States, but I have a couple of students in my co-working startup school program in London who talk about sort of the high street and the lack of retail, and working with property owners to make that space, like leverage it, right? Activate it, and also to bring more traffic so that the retail that's still there gets the activity. So I do think it's interesting. And the opportunity there, again, is kind of what we said at the beginning, which is like, it's underutilized space anyway. And so the return on that can be different. You might do, like, it's very hard for a co-working space to make money if they're all open space, or even a lot of open space, and if they rely on drop-ins. But you could take retail space and make it just really flexible, like, drop in the days you need to avoid your commute. Or
highly local, right? Too, because I know for me, I have the luxury of walking outside, and there's anything and everything. But even in a town in the suburbs out, for me, it's Long Island or Westchester, where wherever people are, we have local stores that a lot of times, even if those people work in the city, maybe they don't have to commute on public transportation anymore for at least a little while.
Totally.
So you have a few resources that you shared with us here. So I would love to chat a little bit. Let's see if this is one that you want to tackle.
I know it's a little eye chart.
Or we can give this one as well.
Yeah, that one's the one that I mentioned up at the beginning, which I think, you know, for anybody watching who's just not that familiar with the marketplace, it just highlights that, you know, independent 84% share of the market. And this is, you know, 2019, but I think a lot of folks think of, you know, WeWork as sort of owning the market, and they certainly have a high share of square footage, but in terms of number of locations, the independent piece is really strong. Lisa, there's a question in the chat about clarity on liability. I think that's a really important question that everybody's still working on, or the association is working on getting some legal support around. And it, you know, some of these things will vary by state, like the guidelines and what the governors are sort of mandating. I mean, some are mandating nothing, and so just, you know, good luck. And then, you know, California's being pretty strict, and so I expect we'll have some clear guidelines around what a workplace looks like. But, you know, liability around, it's an interesting, the flex spaces that are, you know, if a flex space is one company, so one company has taken, you know, 2,000 square feet, 3,000, it's a project space, it's a team space, you know, then the employees can be, you know, sort of operate under the terms and conditions of the company. And the company has its own attorneys and whatnot. But right, for a shared space where we have entrepreneurs and solopreneurs, and then, you know, corporate employees who are coming in to use the space, it's sort of an interesting environment, because it's, you know, it's a public-private space. So we're working on making sure we understand, you know, what's appropriate, want to keep everybody safe, and then, you know, not violate sort of any individual rights. So there's a lot of work kind of being done on all the details right now.
It's very interesting to kind of think about potentially, and I think I was chatting with, must have been Michael before even our chat today, but in preparing for our chat, we were talking a little bit about this expectation of privacy and also freedom. And it will be interesting to see if there are any kind of standard building codes that manifest either from like a federal level, a state level, in, you know, for the sake of public safety. I mean, I don't know. It's interesting to think about. We'll see what happens.
Well, it's like the, you know, the well building certification, like, and I can't remember if you and I know, I've had so many conversations, like, who is that with?
Right.
Talking about, like, I think, you know, we believe there will be something that is kind of like, well, who will do it? And there is a council. So our association's doing work, Industrious and Convene, and a couple of other kind of larger operators. I'm trying to remember what it's called, the workspacecouncil.org, maybe workplacecouncil.org. They've come together and said they're going to try to put together some guidelines. And they have, you know, a list of advisors from, you know, architects, designers, brokerages, some the former, like some safety folks who, you know, to try to think about, right, what do these protocols look like and how can we sort of universally apply them? I think that's probably a first step, because that's not their, you know, primary reason for being. But I do wonder, like, would a well take that on, or would another organization?
I thought about the same thing, the USGBC with their LEED certification.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't see any of those organizations in this way, because it is kind of like the unknown right now. But I think that you do have a lot of you know, global real estate services firms, global portfolio owners, people who have some sort of global presence, even like Michael, who have seen historically things like this play out, either just in local markets. Of course, none of us have seen this on a global scale, but they've seen other things throughout history, other challenges and crisis, whether it's natural disasters, energy grid malfunctions. I mean, those kinds of companies historically have seen things happen and have had to react. And therefore, there's some sort of bank of information to draw from to say, okay, these are the options at least. So I think it'll be more challenging for those that just have their experiences here in the US, and we've never really experienced something like this before. And we're kind of thinking from scratch. But I have seen a lot of kind of re-entry strategies and guidelines be put out by some of these global firms, which is reassuring and just brings, I think in general, commercial real estate, we act under this culture of being very private and holding everything close and not sharing. But I think there is this kind of unprecedented historical moment in time where, for the good of humanity, real estate is the crux of where we do everything, right? For the sake of humanity, sharing information, sharing what is working, sharing, best practices and successes, I think it's everything. I don't know how much it will happen. I don't know how much you've been seeing it in your world, but I hope that.
Yeah, I mean, the workplace council is a great example, I think, of, like I said, like typically, well, like a convenient industrious, you'd seen come together, but a couple of people are like, ooh, Regis and industrious and so on the same list, and co-working tends to be a little more sharing than like traditional real estate. We'll have folks come, we typically host a big in-person conference every year, and people from sort of traditional real estate will come and they'll be like blown away by what people are sharing on stage or in conversations. It's just
a beautiful thing.
It is. And it's part of the reason why I love the industry so much. But of course, there's still competitions heating up as, some of these brands are scaling, competing, and in the same markets, of course. But so, right, I think that council is a great example of like, look, we need to just not worry about, who's who. We all need to find a solution. I also think there's a common, like, okay, if we want to send a positive message to, users, then for the, rising, what do they say? Rising tides lift all boats. Like, we need flex to appear to be safe and a good choice.
Right.
We need to work together to do that and to figure out how do we make it safe and communicate clearly and help people feel comfortable so that the customers will come. And then we'll duke it out as to who gets but make, customers at large feel like this is the right choice.
Right. And then it's an option for them.
Yes. Yeah.
Especially, and we've seen a lot of large corporates diversify their portfolios to incorporate flexible space over the last many years, just as general strategy, because it makes sense, right? Because we have tools that are saying, okay, this building is occupied 40% of the time.
Right.
This one is, more highly utilized. Let's downsize this office. We'll add some people to this headquarters, and we'll use a flex space in between for those who don't want to commute that far, or who still want to stay in this region, or want to come to a physical office sometimes. And so we've seen kind of the upward trajectory of this more flexible creative real estate generally. And so, hopefully it's something that people really trust and rely on during kind of this transition back. Because I think those traditional corporate headquarters, occupier experiences, a lot of that will change significantly. We have a question from my friend Elliot. Hey, Elliot. As institutional owners develop new business plans to capture new revenue, do you foresee co-working and flex spaces being taken back, self-operate, and capture revenue?
Yeah, Elliot, I think that's a great question. And I think in cases we'll see that. I think the challenge for institutional operators is, so we talked, this is probably hour 2 of you, so I won't fault you if you haven't been paying 100% attention to our conversation, but we talked at the beginning about kind of the range of flex space and what the range might look like in any portfolio, from like highly serviced to, just, 2,000 or 3,000 square feet on a shorter term commitment, or also plug and play. Like, it's already lit up, internet's on, it's furnished, like sort of the spec suite model, right? So you might see a range of what that looks like in any portfolio. The flex space can be managed, generally by an institutional owner. And then, wait, tell me, what's Elliot's background?
Elliot, good thing I know who you are. Elliot is an expert in commercial real estate marketing. He is a tech guru, and also comes from the brokerage industry. Knows
Cool.
goes down
Yeah.
the street.
So I'm used to talking like, I have to, oftentimes like just act like I know what I'm talking about. So I don't want to act like I have all the answers, but here's what we think, right? Is there are, there's the range, and many institutional owners are starting to really see, and this is what I think is going to start happening, is some institutional owners like the Heinzes and the Tishmans who, some are doing their own brands. Tishman spun up their own brand and they're rolling it out pretty quickly. And they said, that's going to be a competency that we're going to have right in-house. EQ is partnering, right? So Industrious, I think they've done some convene work, like Brookfield, convene partnerships. Heinz doing some Industrious partnership. And then CBRE, not an institutional owner, but a brokerage who said, we're going to have our own branded solution that we can offer. So we're seeing this mix. I mean, given your background, I'm sure this makes sense, is not every institutional owner just wants to develop that competency, because the highly serviced version of flex space is just really operationally intense, right? The billing's different, the terms are really short. You need to have hospitality staff, it's just a different bear. And the marketing, to me, that's the big challenge, because you're not pulling somebody into 3,000 square feet for 2 years. Like that you can do through, there are tech platforms that do that, like the Liquid Space. I'm sure there are others, or traditional brokerages can manage those deals. But the month to month, it's like, that's just a totally different marketing undertaking that I think is challenging. It's a competency that you really have to develop, and you have to be willing to scale. And so oftentimes, the partnership just makes more sense. And the other piece is that sometimes owners don't even care if those spaces are profitable, right? They want it to be an amenity for the building. And we've seen institutional owners say, like, look, we know it increases the value of the building, so we're going to put one in. We're going to charge more to our other tenants who now have access to these flexible spaces, whether it be workspace or more meeting rooms or project rooms or, whatever it is, or spillover space. Like that value is so big. Yeah, a WeWork build out can be ideally perfect for one tenant, separate small offices, simple way finding open space. Couldn't that translate easy to a direct lease? Meaning like somebody like IBM takes a WeWork space. Yeah, for one tenant. Yeah. So yes, I think so. I mean, yes, I think the point though is the flexibility. Like you could have a mini WeWork. I mean, WeWork is typically, 50,000 square feet. And so you still get the sort of point. I mean, you could. I think the challenge is most tenants don't need to fill that much space because of the the flexibility. So like Verizon uses a lot of flex space, and their people are not in Manhattan, right? They're everywhere. So they have teams around the country, and Lucia, Diana, is on our board, and she's always looking to meet operators and that she can trust and that she's comfortable with, and that she can also work with from a master services agreement standpoint, and put people everywhere, small town.
She's really ahead of the curve too, right? And Lucia has participated on panels for us in the past, and even years ago, hearing her talk about the level of data and insights that she's really gathering and prioritizing across her portfolio were far, out in front of, I think, her colleagues and just the general industry. And so the fact that she has prioritized understanding her buildings and how much they're being used has allowed her to say, just like before, okay, well, we'll downsize this location, we'll stick a couple people here in a flex space, and we'll really, double down in this other location because we see that it's performing better. And that's the power of having transparency into building functions and occupier experience.
So I think what we think is going to start to happen based on kind of the inputs from the brokerages and folks who are doing advisory services to folks like Lucia is more Lucias. Like that'll
it's fine if you can find her, Jamie. I hope she's listening today. If not, we'll have to give her a shout out on
totally.
If only we could find more Lucias, that's for sure. I think that we have a few more minutes. I want to talk about some things that potentially you think could come out of this time, could be affecting co-working or flex space? I mean, we have seen over the last few years institutional owners partner with companies like, let's say, Convene, and even a lot of times it's a revenue share model, but even garner higher rent for a highly serviced and temporary, or not temporary, but short-term space versus leasing a 10,000 square foot floor plate or 30,000 foot square floor plate to a larger tenant over 10 years. And so I think we had some really good traction in this space before any of this happened. Tell me what you think is coming down for the future.
I think, yeah. So I think we'll see a transition phase, as kind of reentry happens and is slower in some markets. So I'm in California, our governor said, like people who can work from home will be at home for months, so that's going to be challenging for a lot of co-working space operators. So I think just from a market perspective, there will be some fallout of folks that, don't make it, who have landlords that aren't sympathetic and, aren't supportive and don't kind of help them get through this time by, extending leases. No, we're never, recommending that anybody ask for, just rent abatement, but an extension, a way to sort of pay back over time. Yeah, Michael's on. Okay, I'll answer your question first, then we'll pop over to Michael. So I think there will be some, the landscape of operators will look different, and, we'll see some of the folks that have, investment money in the bank and can weather this hard time, and have also kind of been on this path of more private space, the common grounds, the industrious, the, trying to think of some of the other, novel is another example, like really kind of already catering to the user who is in more of a private space. They'll have to make some adjustments. And again, lots of time being spent on those details. But I think overall, what we'll see is sort of like everybody sort of looking at their customer and saying, okay, well, are the freelancers coming back? That may take some time, right? Because sort of freelancers, solopreneurs who can work at home, if they've lost clients and, their business has been really impacted, we may see that segment fall off for some time, which may be okay, given the fact that they tend to match up to open space, and we want less people in the open space.
Right.
And then there's sort of the small business owner. And, what is their profile? Have they been impacted, really strongly financially throughout this? If they don't own retail and, so if they've been okay, they still need a place to meet their team, right? Jerome Chang, who I mentioned earlier, he lived through the kind of 2008 crisis. And he said, the small business owners come back because it's never appropriate to have a team meeting in your living room, and it's like, we learn to work virtually, but it's still not always the best case scenario, right?
Smaller, I'd rather be talking to you face to face.
Right. It's better. It's better in many cases, especially when you're sort of new startup, like smaller team. So, he argues that he's seen like that customer will come back. They may be impacted though, and then they may need to move into private, more private space versus open space for now. And then we think the corporate customer is going to accelerate a lot, and that places that are, sort of have the infrastructure to support that group, more private spaces, will do well. So I think people with a lot of open space are going to see some challenges for the next, 18 months or, to 2 years. Nobody knows. And I think Michael was sort of saying, and again, I didn't hear your entire conversation, but like, we don't know yet because we need to see how the humans respond. Like, are we so and also just like the science of what happens when we all, gather again, and can we control, and can we, we've seen some, I think Shanghai just had a reclosure. I think, cycles. I was talking to a friend of mine who works for a private school in New Hampshire. And she said they're planning for an extended winter break because they think, they're worried we'll see another cycle in the winter, that maybe we'll get to the fall and then the winter will be much higher risk. And so we'll see. So I think, again, the sort of customer segment, everybody needs to sort of rethink, like, who are they serving? How is their space set up? But we think the enterprise customer will be a big win for those that can accommodate them.
And it's interesting too, because although we maybe bank a little bit on the freelancers and, those contractors, if you will, from a co-working environment, there are a lot of people that, unfortunately have been laid off and are either looking for work or maybe being creative during this time and retooling and, going to start working for themselves. And so I think there's this whole new workforce that exists all of a sudden that, it's beyond just trying to predict human behavior from what we've normally known. It's a whole new demographic of people and human behavior that is going to first kind of play out before our eyes. So I think I'm with you. We have to kind of wait and see to some extent. And we'll take this last question. Do you feel that co-working spaces are uniquely positioned to respond to the COVID crisis as opposed to traditional corporate real estate from, a marketing, technology, sanitation perspective, or, others?
Yeah, Michael, I started talking about this a little bit, and I did sort of a SWOT analysis of co-working spaces, which I'll send to you. It's a total eye chart. So Mariel tried to put it on the screen. It's not very readable, but
is that this
sort of like plus, in my arrow up and plus columns are things like the fact that co-working spaces tend to be, outside of a WeWork, a manageable size with staff that are nimble and can be retrained very quickly. And they have a lot of control over the physical space, right? And I know you know that. And so we may need to sort of, reallocate staff time or add staff, which for some will be really challenging to the financial model. So do we have porters that are constantly cleaning? Like, can the community manager do that? Or do we need to add in folks that are coming through and doing the constant wipe downs? We talked about the coffee service. So folks have said, the community manager will do the barista role. That can be hard in a, high volume, space with lots of people who need coffee and just, people coming in and out. And I think it'll depend on the volume of traffic that we see coming in, over the next few months. Of course, for spaces to continue to be viable, we need that traffic to be high enough. So I think there's just going to be some tension around, serving people the right way, but keeping the model viable. But back to your point, I do think that this is why we're getting feedback that some of the corporate customers will feel more comfortable in a smaller environment because it's not a corporate campus. We can show you we can clean several times a day. We can wipe down the conference rooms. They're more sort of, nice visible signals of what's happening from a health and safety perspective. And I did mention the technology piece. I think co-working spaces will kind of ramp up some of the safety features like, the digital door access and also the automatic door openers and touchless, trash cans and sinks and, all the things that, maybe we haven't prioritized from an investment standpoint, but I think that will start to shift.
Yeah, I would expect so. I mean, are there any other kind of things that you might imagine for a co-working of the future or a co-working of 6 months from now that you want to share before we wrap up our conversation, or anything you want to share?
Yeah. I mean, I would just say that, like kind of Michael said, I think it's going to be a great evolution. And I think, you and I talked in our pre-chat about just sort of having, I think the winners will, not the winners, but people who thrive. And thrive may be sort of an aggressive word to sort of use during this challenging time. I don't want to downplay, as Michael said, the health issues that, some of our friends and loved ones are experiencing.
Won't come from this time.
But I think, there are operators who are saying, okay, this is an opportunity to rethink my business. I did a podcast episode on look, all of your customers just went home and some of them stopped paying you. Do you want to serve the same group? Is there a group that you could serve better, more profitably, that would give you more joy, like it's the time to totally rethink, because you have to bring back your customer. And so you could change all the things, right now.
Right.
And so I think there will be just a total revisiting of who's the customer, what does the product look like? And that's from, space allocation to technology to safety protocols. And that we will see an evolution over the 6 months, and that the folks who, do well will just be constantly iterating, trying to get in front of what the market will require. I think the corporate user will have a checklist of safety requirements, right? They'll sort of come in with their list, and you better have signals that show that you meet those. And then there will, be other things that we iterate around, helping people feel comfortable. And then even, to your point about people retooling, well, that happened after, 07, 08 as well. And co-working spaces, for that user can be, sort of a life changer for people, because to retool at home by yourself is hard, and the community piece of other people who are doing the same thing, going through the same challenges and trying to get out of this, in a healthy place, like that can make all the difference sometimes. So
and even in that instance, we saw a lot of what today we consider like industry disruptions born. And that was the time, right? So, and I have no doubt, I have full faith, especially in like our community that I get to, hear from in DisruptCRE. People are creative and people are entrepreneurial. They want to push the boundaries of what we're capable of accomplishing, both from a human standpoint, a technology standpoint, a community standpoint. And so I'm really excited to see all of the positive impact that comes from this. And from a human standpoint, I want to see what people are creating and thinking, and what happens from here.
Yeah, I'm optimistic.
Yeah, exactly. Optimistic is a good word. And like Michael said, I think just at the foundation of everything we do, just being grateful for the blessings that we have every day, and just waking up healthy and safe is an incredible blessing just in and of itself. And so I think that's a good time to bid everybody a wonderful Friday and say goodbye. I did link Jamie's podcast in the comments already, but we'll share any other resources. I think you had some other resources that you had sent me that we can share as well. And feel free to keep sending us questions in the comments. And we just appreciate all of you guys for joining us today. And Jamie,
great questions. And Mariel, thank you for having me. It was great to get to chat today.
My pleasure. We'll talk to you soon. Bye, everyone.
Bye.